So, History of Chennai, Part 1. Sources Wikipedia and the rest of the internet, of course. All credits go to the original author. I have only put this together as a PowerPoint presentation. So, this is just a map between 1498 and 1739 showing all the European settlements in India. There you have, it says Madras at 1639 here. So it's easy to imagine Madras, or at least it's easy to not imagine Madras before the British came. It's easy to imagine it as as a vacuum, but actually that's not quite true. There were several references um, of settlements in Madras or this region over a period of time. The very first discovery of settlement was in Pallavaram, of course, showing evidence of Paleolithic culture. This is the stone axe that was discovered by Robert Bruce Fruit. He is a very important man, and he went on to discover several Paleolithic settlements across South India. He was probably the one who started the Indian Archaeological Society. And of course, the references to Tondai Mandalam as a region in various Tamil literature as well. And it's this Tondai Mandalam had been part of Kurumbas, Cholas, Kalabras, Pallavas, Pandyas. Pallavas, of course, built the Mahabalipuram temples and the Kanchipuram temples. Pandyas, Vijayanagara Empire. And there are several temples within the city which associate themselves with various of these periods. And two other kings, Nedumudi Killi and Thondaiman Vilam Thiriyan, were supposed to have ruled over this region. Thiruvalluvar, of course, was said to have come from Mylapore. Peyalvar, one of the earliest Alvars, came from Mylapore as well. Tirkachi Nambi, again an associate of Ramanuja, is supposed to have come from Punamali. There's evidence to show that Buddhism and Jainism had also thrived here. And there's a historian who summed it up nicely by saying that Tondai Mandalam was the heart of Pallava Empire, helmet of the Chola Empire, scene of a triangular contest among the Pandyas, the nucleus of Saluva Narasimha's power, and the brave of the Vijayanagar Empire. So this is again a close-up of the same map. Clearly, it says Madras. The British came here at 1639, but of course, even before the British, the Portuguese had settlements across the western coast in 1500s, and they had also established settlement in Santo in 1500. So, of course, the British came much later. The credit for the East India Company getting started at Madras goes to a man called Francis Day. Francis Day had his company slightly north of Pulicat. Pulicat, of course, at that time was under the Dutch. Even today, you can visit the Dutch cemetery at Pulicat. So Francis Day was not really happy with the factory that they had north of Pulicat, and he was sailing along the coast towards Pondicherry and happened to spot this area. It was about 3 miles and 1 mile wide in between two rivers, and he thought, this may be a good place to have another factory for East India Company. So he meets up with a man called Beri Timappa, who was a translator at the time, and who negotiates with the local chieftains. And of course, they go all the way to Chandragiri, where the Vijayanagara king was at that time. This is Francis Day, and they sign a deed with him which gave them rights to settle and trade from the region for a year or two, of course. Of course, initially it wasn't easy for the East India Company, and there were a lot of problems, fighting between various communities. And of course, initially the fortified area was known as the White Town, because all the whites or the Protestant whites lived within the fort. Even the non-Protestant whites were living outside and along with the rest of the Indian population, and that was known as the Black Town. Subsequently, because of various problems, the rest of the whites were let inside as well. So the whites exclusively lived within the fort, and of course the rest of the area continued as the Black Town. And one of the early governors was Eluhi Ale. Eluhi Ale, of course, we know about the Yale University in America. Eluhi Ale was first the governor of Madras. He made a lot of money, and with that money, of course, he established the Yale University, North America. This is just an artist's impression of how the fort was at that time, and this is an interesting plan. One of the early plans you can see. This is, of course, the Bay of Bengal. This is the fortified White Town. The adjacent areas were known as the Black Town. Again, another map. Of course, the Bay of Bengal is here. This is the White Town, and this is the Black Town, as it says here. Interesting to see names like Mutial Peta, Pedanaidu Peta, so on, and there were various grounds, of course, gardens and grounds marked for burying people of various communities. This is just an overview of what was happening in the rest of South India at the time. Of course, Vijayanagar Empire was dwindling, and the main players were the Golconda forces here, Bijapur, Mysore, and several other small kingdoms. So one of the first challenges came from Mir Jumla. He is a general under Golconda Fort, and he came with a force down to attack the fort. And there is, of course, contradiction. There's some references to say that Mir Jumla attacked Fort St. George, and there are other references which say that he only came to attack the Portuguese, and the English actually supported Mir Jumla against the Portuguese. But what is interesting is this story of Syed Badruddin. Syed Badruddin was a local soldier who was fighting for the Golconda forces, and as the forces were winning the battle, and he climbs up the fort of Santhome to plant the flag of Golconda, and as he comes down, a Portuguese soldier was supposed to have wounded him badly. Of course, the legend says that he carried his own head and galloped on his horse with his dog following all the way to Pallavaram, where he died. The truth is more likely to be that he may have been grievously injured, but anyway, there's still a dargah there for people to visit, and that's the only physical reminder of the 1646 battle for Santhome that we have. Interesting story, nevertheless. So Golconda forces attacked Madras stroke Santhome in 1646. After Golconda, of course, the region came under the Mughal emperors, so the East India Company folk had to renegotiate their settlement with the Mughal emperors, and they managed to get the towns of Tandayarpet, Porshavakkam, and Egmore under their rule. This is just to give an idea of the expanse of the Mughal Empire at that time, all the way down south here. And then in August 1698, Pitt comes to Madras to become the governor, and Emperor Aurangzeb orders his general Daud Khan to besiege Fort St. George, and for 3 months Daud Khan besieges Fort St. George, and eventually the British East India Company gives up, and they vie for peace, and they have a negotiated settlement, and through that settlement the East India Company gains 5 villages of Tiruvatiyur, Nungambakam, Vyasarpadi, Katyavakam, and Sattangudu. So interestingly, at that time, the local powers, one of the local powers was the Nawab of Carnatic. The Kingdom of Carnatic was, of course, abutting the Fort St. George area, and the Nawab of Carnatic was the local man for the Mughal emperor. The British had directly negotiated this settlement, and of course, Sadatullah Khan probably wanted to make some money out of it, So he openly fails to recognize that these villages that were granted to the East India Company belong to them. So he sends the forces, he sends his forces and occupies the village of Tiruvattur and other local villages. But of course, the British send their own forces from the fort. A quick battle ensues, which lasted for the day, and the East India Company wins that battle, and they reclaim the villages and get back to the fort. And eventually, of course, they sign a peace treaty with Saadullah Khan after giving sufficient money. Very soon afterwards, the next challenge to Fort St. George comes from the French. This has been described as the Battle of Madras, and this was a fallout of the battle that's been happening elsewhere. It was called the War of Austrian Succession, and the British and the French were fighting all over the place. So this war um, was between the French side of the war was led by Dupleix, who was the governor of Pondicherry at the time, and he attacks through his land forces, and another commander called Labourdonnais, he sails all the way from Mauritius with his fleet of ships. This is just an artist impression there, and that's the sea, and you can see all these firing from the ships onto the fort. So it was a twin attack from both sides, and eventually the Brits were defeated, and the French occupy Fort St. George for a period, and of course, subsequently, they sign a treaty called the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle, as a result of which the French hand over the Fort St. George to back to the Brits, and they gain another territory in return in North America. So anyway, whilst the French were occupying the fort, the Nawab of Carnatic, the Nawab of Arcot or Carnatic, um, again he gets angry, and he's unhappy that the French have attacked and taken up Fort St. George with so much impudence, and so he comes and comes to attack the French with a big force, and of course the French come and meet the forces of Nawab. So this is the Adayar. This is the Adayar River where it meets the sea, and there's an estuary here, and this used to be known as the Quibble Island. And this is where this pitched battle was fought. What is probably MRC Nagar now. So this is a very important battle because there were only 1,000 French soldiers, and there were about 10,000 soldiers of the Nawab, and of course the French defeated the forces of Nawab, and it became an important battle because after this the European powers really became confident that with their superior training and guns and whatnot, they could easily take on the local Indian forces. So this is known as the Battle of Adayar. After which, of course, like I said, the French handed over the fort back to the British because of the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle. And then the next attack again from the French. This has been described as the Siege of Madras of 58 and 59. And this time William Draper was in the fort, and this attack from the French side was commanded by Lally. Lally again brought a huge force to attack the fort itself, and he mounted cannons, and I think he did the siege for about 3 months. But due to some misunderstandings on the French side, they really couldn't capture the fort, and of course, the British were also aided by Yusuf Khan. Yusuf Khan was born as Marudanayagam Pillai and later converted to Yusuf Khan. He was a very brave and able general, which was well respected by the British. And his is an interesting story on its own. And this was the movie that Kamal Hassan was going to make, but that never managed to do. So, of course, this battle, the French lost the battle, and the Brits, of course, retained Fort St. George. Okay, and we come to the end of part 1. Thank you for listening.